Boom.
Nathaniel Abraham was just 11 years old when he found himself in the middle of one of the most controversial murder cases in the history of the United States.
Pause. I gotta get my ribs. Hold on, chat. I'm gonna be right back.
He wasn't alone. Another neighbor, an 11-year-old girl, shared a similar sentiment because, according to her, when they were both 9, Nate had threatened her with a gun. So, as Nathaniel Abraham's murder case began to take its hold in the center of public consciousness, it became clear that his entire block had turned against him. As disturbing as these allegations sounded, it seemed like they were true. All of his neighbors wanted him locked up, except one. Only one neighbor on Nate's block came to his defense when the cameras started rolling. He didn't try to downplay or dismiss claims about the boy.
I think that's crazy for him to be charged as an adult.
Where was he from? Did they say that yet? Okay, I don't think they...
He was only 11 years old.
This neighbor was convinced that the little boy wasn't the devil. He was just a broken child who made terrible decisions. This man had also experienced a version of Nate that his name...
Hold on, that dog ain't playing. Dog trying to bite little bro head off.
Just hadn't got the chance to see. He wanted...
Hey, look. Dog have another thing coming for me. Boy, telling you.
Government and the prosecutors to go easy on the young boy. Why? Because Nathaniel Abraham was an 11-year-old boy charged with the murder of an 18-year-old named Ronnie Green.
So he was 11, but he killed an 18-year-old. That shit don't sound right to me. That ain't sitting right to me.
In the most controversial turn of events, the state of Michigan was willing and ready to try him as an adult.
He from Michigan? Y'all don't know, chat. That's where I'm from. I'm from the mid.
Due to the severity of his crime, and if they found him guilty, if the prosecutors were able to get what they wanted, little Nate would spend the rest of his life in prison for a crime he committed when he was just 11. Some of you watching would say murder is murder regardless of the age. That's what makes the intricacies of this story all the more interesting. Let me set the record straight before we dive into this case. The true victim in this story was 18-year-old Ronnie Green. Nate was a preteen who killed a teenager, and now he had to face the consequences. So, what went wrong? We have to trace the thread back to the very beginning.
Check this out. I'm going to show you how I afforded this car. Okay, you ready? All right.
Pontiac, Michigan, 1986. Months after he was born, his father left and never returned. This sudden change resulted in incredible hardship for the family because Nate wasn't the only child. There were 6 of them. His mother, Gloria, was forced to take up 2 jobs to keep their family afloat. She had to work day and night, so she was never around. And Nate's formative years were spent under the care of his older siblings. Gloria was caught between a rock and a hard place, between spending time raising her children or working hard to ensure they didn't starve to death. It's no easy dilemma. However, this whole situation turned out to be the perfect storm for something dark within Nate. With no one to keep him in check, Nate became delinquent. From the moment he could walk, he began to exhibit extremely antisocial behavior. Many kids show these traits when they are young. Parents corrected and rooted out, but no one was around to do that for Nate. So it grew into something so ugly.
What am I eating? I just said I'm eating ribs. Tighten up.
At the time that he was 9, he had become a troublesome child with a rap sheet of a serious middle-aged criminal. From the age of 9 till 11, Nate had 22 police encounters, some for arson, a couple of others for assault, and several for breaking and entering. Out of those 22, at least 5 involved
he broke in his house and killed them?
One involved a 14-year-old that he beat with a steel pipe, and the last involved an adult, a bus driver. At some point,
this little boy
became such a problem in the neighborhood that the prosecutors would later reveal in court that a neighbor moved out of the block because of him. That same neighbor would also say, quite prophetically, that someday Nate was going to kill somebody. Now, you are probably wondering what Nate's mother did during this period. At some point, she began to feel helpless when almost every day there was someone knocking on their door reporting Nate's latest crime. One major reason why she felt helpless was because that she had actually gone to the police for help. She wanted them to intervene in her son's situation, but they referred her to the juvenile court. And when she got there, they sent her back to the police, telling her that her word wasn't enough. No one was prepared to help. Nobody was ready to intervene. Now, remember when I said Nate was born into a perfect storm? There was one more piece left for the chaotic future he was now destined to have. The 1980s was a very interesting decade in American history. Ronald Reagan became president. CNN became a thing. There were those interesting looking Macintosh computers, and then there was violence. Widespread violence in major cities like New York and Chicago. However, the most troubling part of the 1980s was the spike in the level of violent crimes committed by juveniles. Between 1980 and 1994, the number of juvenile homicide offenders doubled. And according to FBI clearance statistics from that time frame, the juvenile responsibility for all homicides in the country grew from 5% to 10%. The quick answer to why this was happening was the crack epidemic of the mid-1980s. In the inner cities, it had become a plague, and it wasn't long before those drugs got paired with guns and juveniles. Now, the progression from drug trade to gun violence isn't surprising. In fact, many would agree it's natural and expected. But how did kids get into the mix? Well, drug traffickers at the time found that children and teenagers made excellent recruits, better than adults. Children worked as low-level sellers, carriers, and lookouts, while working for less, taking greater risks, and escaping detention. Because at the time, no one would have guessed that an 11-year-old standing on a street corner was a drug dealer. And even when these kids got caught, their age implied innocence, and it meant that they escaped punishment. From the drug dealer's perspective, these juveniles were beyond perfect. So it wasn't long before these same juveniles came in contact with guns and began using them for their own protection, even if they didn't need to. They aspired to use them because guns had become a status symbol for the drug dealing lifestyle that these kids now wanted to be a part of. And that's why just a decade earlier in 1976, records showed that less than 2/3 of juvenile homicide offenders used a gun. And by 1994, 82% of juveniles used a gun in cases of homicide. This was the background of Nate's childhood. And while there is no record of drug dealing activity on his juvenile record, it wouldn't be wild to suggest that he found himself in that crowd, and that it was that crowd that enabled his truancy. Where else do you think he got the gun he used? His mother didn't own a gun. Now, as expected, the government's response to this spike of violent, gun-fueled juvenile delinquency was to turn to the law.
The best agency to start in 2024 is a real estate marketing agency. I make $200,000 per month.
So, as the 1980s progressed, a growing number of states passed laws stipulating that kids under 17 could be tried as adults for certain crimes. It was a weird way to deal with the problem because they weren't seeking direct solutions. They were just adding to the punishment. Supporters of this law, who happened to be civilians like you and me, took to the streets, waving banners and slogans that read, "Adult crime, adult time." And by 1992, more than 40 states had passed laws for trying children as adults. But no state's version of the juvenile justice law matched the severity of Michigan's. Michigan, the same state that Nathaniel Abraham was born in, raised in, and would commit his devastating crime in, set no limits on the age that a child could be tried as an adult. They called their law "Get Tough on Juvenile Offenders." In fact, when one of the state senators who pushed for this law was asked if a child as young as 4 could be tried as an adult, his answer was a resounding yes. The stage is now set for Nathaniel Abraham's crime. And 3 years after that law was passed in 1997, when 11-year-old Nathaniel Abraham shot 18-year-old Ronnie Green, he became the scapegoat of a law that set the scene for the country's most controversial juvenile murder trial to date. On the 31st of October 1997, there was a commotion in Lincoln Middle School. There were police officers in the 6th grade class, and they were reading their rights, not to the class teacher, but to 11-year-old Nathaniel Abraham, dressed up in a Halloween costume. A day before, on the 30th of October, 1997, an 18-year-old boy named Ronnie Green had passed away after fighting for his life for almost 24 hours. He had been shot in the head by a single bullet from a .22 caliber rifle. As investigators scrambled to find out who this killer was, they discovered that on the day before, 11-year-old Nathaniel Abraham had stolen a .22 caliber rifle and gone shooting outside.
Where the fuck did he get that long ass rifle from though? That's what I'm confused about. Boy, I better teach our kids something out here, bro.
He shot at a neighbor's house first, narrowly missing the man who owned the house. And moments later, he stood in a cluster of trees about 200 feet away from a convenience store, took aim, and fired a bullet that would hit 18-year-old Ronnie Green in the head and kill him roughly a day later.
So he didn't even know him. He was just playing with the fire. He seen somebody across the street and he sniped his ass and killed them. That's crazy, bro.
While Nate admitted that he was the one who shot Ronnie, he denied targeting him. Instead, he claimed that he was only aiming for light bulbs and trees.
Are you older than 18? We're looking for motivated people to take online cybersecurity classes.
The shot that killed Ronnie Green was, by his own admission, an unfortunate error. The prosecutors weren't buying it. Despite the fact that the 11-year-old boy had never met Ronnie Green before the shooting, they were convinced that he had deliberately set out to kill someone that day. If you're wondering what fueled the prosecutor's conviction, well, they had evidence that Nate had spoken to his girlfriend, saying that he was going to kill someone on the morning.
Like, just imagine you sitting at the bus stop or just chilling in front of the stove and you get shot in your head or something out of nowhere. Like, you don't even know. That's crazy, bro.
Ronnie Green's tragic demise. And that, after the shooting, he had bragged about the kill he made to his friends. With the backing of Michigan's Get Tough on Juvenile Offenders law, the prosecutors received permission to try Nate as an adult, charging him with first-degree murder and several other felonies. Nate was arrested, placed in handcuffs, and he was sent to Oakland County Children's Village, a juvenile detention center in Michigan, while he awaited trial. The arrest was deeply controversial. Controversial enough to deeply divide the country along several ethical lines. While there were many unwilling to contribute to the discussion, there were many more who thought that this was a fitting punishment for the 11-year-old Nate. There was an overwhelming majority, especially in the black community, who were against the decision. Amnesty International, Reverend Al Sharpton, and probably every major civil rights activist in the country protested against the whole affair, calling it a disgrace to the justice system that should protect children, delinquent or not. Like I noted earlier, they were trying to try him as an adult, and if he was found guilty, he would be sent to prison for the rest of his life. One lawyer was outraged enough by the case that he chose to take it on pro bono at no cost to Nate's family. This lawyer was named Jeffrey Feiger. He was a lawyer who, up to that point, had built a reputation for taking on most cases that lawyers wouldn't touch. His most infamous past client at that time was a man named Jack Kevorkian, also known as Dr. Death. Jack Kevorkian was an actual doctor with the rap sheet of a comic book villain. On his rap sheet, the man had advocated harvesting the organs from death row inmates. While he was a pathologist, he experimented with transfusing blood from the recently deceased into live patients. He did a lot of bizarre, unethical things throughout his career as a doctor, but the most controversial one, the one that got Jeffrey Feiger representing him as his attorney in court, involved assisted suicide in Michigan. Kevorkian's story is worthy of its own video, so I won't go down that rabbit hole. Just know that while Nate's situation was controversial, it was not new to Jeffrey Feiger. And immediately he took on Nate's case. He began a series of motions and appeals that delayed the trial for at least 2 more years, enough time for him to prepare. On the 29th of October 1999, the murder trial began. Nate's first appearance in court looked like something from a really dark SNL sketch. He was dressed in oversized prison garb. There were cuffs on his wrists and chains on his feet. When he was
And he only 11 years old, bro. That is crazy. I'm not gonna lie, dog. That's crazy work. I can't lie.
To raise his right hand, he raised his left. Halfway through the hearings, he would start sobbing, and for most of the trial, he looked lost. But prosecutors and the politicians who supported this law were hell-bent on seeing it through to the end. I'm gonna shoot somebody. In her opening statement, the prosecutor, Lisa Haluska, dramatically wrote down those words for the jury to read. She claimed that these were the words that 11-year-old Nate told his girlfriend days before the killing. As the trial progressed, this prosecutor called witnesses.
And what the hell you doing with a girlfriend at 11 years old? Boy, well, nigga trying to grow up too fast, man.
Who supported the idea that
That's
Nathaniel's
crazy work
act
right there,
was,
I ain't
in
gonna
fact,
lie.
a premeditated murder. According to the witnesses, he had stolen the rusty rifle he used, then practiced target shooting at balloons and the houses of his neighbors before the fatal shooting of Ronnie Green.
What is a premeditated murder? A premeditated murder is basically where you planning to kill someone. Like, you have it planned out that you're gonna kill this person this day or this set time. That's what a premeditated murder is. Like, you know you're gonna kill this person. You saying it in advance. So that's what a premeditated murder is. If you ain't know that, and for some of y'all that didn't know.
The prosecutor would also note that Nate had told the police contradicting stories about the shooting, which, according to her, was proof that he knew what he had done and that it was wrong. When it was Joffrey Feiga's turn, he argued that the shooting was an unfortunate accident. He didn't dispute the fact that Nathaniel fired the gun, but he insisted that the boy was not trying to hit anyone. Feiga brought an expert marksman to stand as a witness who testified that it would have been almost impossible to
So I wonder, did he get life?
What kind of car do you drive?
A 2022 Tesla Model Y. Why?
If you don't mind me asking, what do you pay for car insurance?
consider a lesser offense. Nate had an anger issue. To be quite frank, he had a lot of issues. Enough of them to require several disciplinary actions taken against him. Nate had an affinity for getting into fights, even though he never really started them. He had a pattern of yelling at prison staff.
Dang, that's crazy. He probably still in there doing time too. It was crazy. Dang. I ain't even gonna say free that boy. Shit, keep him in there. Shit, I ain't shit. You did the crime, do the time. Like I tell y'all all the time. Make sure you like and sub though.